يا هادنا يا محمد عليك السلام. قولوا يا هادنا يا محمد عليك السلام. الله 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 الله، ما لنا مولى سوى الله. الله 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 الله، ما لنا مولى سوى الله. كلما ناديت يا قال يا عبدي أنا الله. الله الله الله، ما لنا مولى سوى الله. الله الله الله، ما لنا مولى سوى الله. كلما ناديت يا قال يا عبدي أنا الله. يا ختام الأنبياء يا إمام الأولياء، يا ختام الأنبياء يا إمام الأولياء، رحمة أرسلت طه منقذا بعد الضلال. الله 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 الله، ما لنا مولى سوى الله. الله الله الله، ما لنا مولى سوى الله. كلما ناديت يا قال يا عبدي أنا الله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
تكبير
الله أكبر.
تكبير
الله أكبر.
تكبير.
الله أكبر.
جزاكم الله.
وإياكم.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Nagami Institute of Islamic Medical Sciences, our conversation on Rumi, and the reason we're having this talk. But before we get started, Jazakumullah, Hafiz Sinan, for allowing us to hear this beloved, the praises of our beloved Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and reminding us to our purpose in life. So it's very interesting. I was in Konya maybe a month, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks ago, and I was in Konya, and I'm thinking, subhanAllah, the experience I'm having here compared to what people actually think of, compared to what people actually think of Rumi. Like, Rumi has become kind of someone who's like floating in the air, like Oprah quotes him, like the Dalai Lama. People think that some of his deeper talks are about, falling in love, or that they're not necessarily related to spiritual connection to the divine. And I knew there's a knowledge gap because my access to it is mainly in English. And then it's not like you really hear like somebody in like a khutbah saying, "Oh, quoting from the Matnawi Jalaluddin Rumi said." That's something that I've never heard someone say. So considering his history, he was trained as a Hanafi jurist. When I was in Konya, he was the Imam of the Masjid for 23 years. Clearly, he's a practicing Muslim with, I'm sure, immense amount of history and legacy that we can all learn from. Is in that time I ran into Maulana Saleh Basir here, who has a deeper understanding. He reads and understands Urdu, Farsi, Turkish, Arabic, and so we were able to put together this program. So I'm very honored to have him here today, as well as Waris Fazlayar, who's going to also play the Rabab, which I have not heard before, but I'm very excited because I know a lot of the analogies and symmetry revolve around some of those instruments. So without further ado, Maulana Saleh Basir.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على من لا نبي بعده ولا أمة بعد أمته ولا كتاب بعد كتابه ولا شريعة بعد شريعته ولا صحابة بعد صحابته أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم إن زلزلة الساعة شيء عظيم وقال النبي العربي الهاشمي عليه أفضل الصلوات وأكمل التحيات وأكمل التسليمات عليه السلام وإن من البيان لسحر وإن من الشعر لحكمة أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم. Thank you guys so much for coming. This truly means so much to the both of us. We had a previous program today at Khalil Sen, and we were talking about this idea that just 200 years ago, Maulana Rumi would have been quoted in the streets. एक बात यह है कि मस्जिद में जिक्र किया जाए, एक है सड़क में या कोरियान ये तो दूसरी बात है. And the fact that we have lost that, earlier today we had mentioned that if somebody, of course we can't do it, but if somebody did a statistical survey of the mental well-being of Muslims in the 1700s versus now, I think it would be vastly different. And I think that Maulana Rumi has, and his notions of akhlaqi Farsi poetry being quoted in the streets and in the masjids. We know in the letters of Hazrat Aurangzeb Alamgir, Qaddasallahu sirrahu, many times he says, Murshid Rum farmudan. The Murshid of Rum said this, and will bring a ghaza. Dara Shikoh, his brother, would quote from Maulana Rumi a lot. The first Mughal emperor, Muhammad Zahiruddin Babur, in his memoirs, mentions how his father, Sheikh Mirza, the great grandson of Timur Ilang, he mentions 4 qualities about his father. And this is interesting. So this is, a very well-heeled, highbrow, Hanafi, Sunni Muslim, Central Asian culture in Faraghinan. And he says 4 things. He says, first, his father never missed namaz. 2, he said that his father always stuck to the Hanafi madhab and didn't madhab hop, which is fascinating. Number 3, he says that his father could recite from Maulana Jami's Yusuf and Zulaykha and the Matnavi of Maulana Rumi. And just these 3-4 qualities of sticking, to your legal school of thought, of praying namaz and being connected to an akhlaqi literary tradition. I think it's very true to say that once Muslims lost their literature, they lost their akhlaq. And I think that's very fair to say that, in the way that we talk, even in Urdu, the way that we use aap, that doesn't exist in English. We always talk about how millennials or Gen Z don't have adab, but the more serious question is, why don't they know Urdu and Arabic? And I think that's, if we were to fix that gap, many of the adabi and akhlaqi masail and mushkilat would really be solved. And I don't think I'm alone in saying this. And as in Hyderabad, the Indian Muslim, I was looking through the archives of the Salar Jung Library Museum, and there are hundreds and hundreds of shuruhat on 3 figures. One is Sa'd al-Shirazi. They always call him Sheikh Sa'di. Number 2 is Hafiz al-Shirazi. And number 3 is Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. And the amount of Muslims from Delhi and Hyderabad that have written comment, and the Mathnawi is a 50,000 line book, or 50,000 bayt book. The fact that someone could write a sharah on a 50,000, that means when you write a commentary, you have to double that or even triple that, right? And so the fact that Muslims 200 years ago in cities like Hyderabad and Delhi knew his significance and knew his importance. What does it mean to create a whole society based on the values and the adabiyat and the akhlaqiyat of Mawlana Rumi. And this is something, that hopefully, as Brother Shahab just mentioned, why don't our ulama quote Mawlana Rumi anymore? There was a time on the minbar of Baghdad, on the minbar of Damascus, on the minbar of Budapest in Hungary when the Ottomans conquered it, on the minbars of Kabul, Lahore, Chittagong, Dhaka, Mawlana Rumi was one of the most cited figures, probably after Imam Bukhari. And so why have we lost that? And what can we do to fill that gap? And I think that this, thank you guys so much for hosting this event. Truly may it be a form of sifarish. May we meet Mawlana Rumi on the Day of Judgment, and may he be happy with us that we did a little bit for his lifelong effort to preserve and uphold the beauty of Islam, right? And I hope that this will, again, the most important thing is that we gain consciousness of God and love of his holy prophet. And alayhi salatu wassalam. And Mawlana Rumi is a singular figure who can sort of teach us that, who can lead us there. And with that in mind, I'm going to pass it off to Ustad Waris, who will give us a brief pase manzar or a background on the social and the political history of Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi. And I hope that as Iqbal said, how does he start off his Jawab Shikwa? दिल से जो बात निकलती है असर रखती है पर नहीं ताकत परवाज मगर रखती है कुदसी उल असल है रफ़त पे नजर रखती है खाक से उठती है गर्दू पे गुजर रखती है. And this gardu, the heavenly rotation is who else could teach us that but through Mawlana? Because the reality is that when me and you open the Quran, or when me and you open up the life of the Arab Holy Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, me and you are not going to understand him in the way that Mawlana did. So let us use Mawlana as a ladder to get to the Holy Prophet. Because in Islam, we have the idea of the sanad. There is no hadith that I cannot trace back 1400 years back to the Holy Prophet. And that's what makes Islam so different from any other religion, is the sanad. And the sanad is not just a hadith terminology or istilah, but it is also a literary thing of where do we get our literary values from. I'm just going to mention one last thing, if that's okay. Just a point that we mentioned earlier today is that our Torah, our Islamic civilization, is like a mother to us. هي كأم لنا. And in the same way, يلزم علينا أن نحترم أمنا. In the same way that it's necessary for us to honor our mother, it's also necessary for us to honor our past and our civilization. Why? Because it gave birth to us. Right? The culture that our grandparents lived in gave birth to us. And we are, and just as the Holy Prophet said, كما رواه في الصحيحين الرحم معلق على العرش فمن وصلها وصله الله ومن قطعها قطعه الله. Whoever disconnects themselves from the rahim, which is the womb of the mother. So all the maternal relations, and who do you get your culture from but through your mother, right? And so the moment that we cut ourselves off, we do qata' from ourselves, in our tarikh, in our tamaddun, in our tahzeeb, in our hadara, that is the moment that Allah cuts himself and his light and his barakah and his khair from us, right? And we will, and so many Muslims live in a state of psychosis today. And truly, I believe singularly and exceptionally, this is because we have totally removed ourselves from our tarikh and our madi, right? And once that, and this is not to say that we are tarikh parasti or mazi parasti, that we worship the past, but no, the past is there to teach us. What does Allah say in the Quran? لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قِصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. قُلْ سِيرُوا, يعني هذا فعل الأمر, right? This is the command sigha. So why have we lost that? Why is it such that Mawlana Rumi in his Mathnawi can talk about Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Ali, and also talk about Turkic kings, Mongolian kings, Umayyad kings, Abbasid kings, Layla and Majnun? Why is all of that, 600 ayat, as Ustad Waris will tell us, is located in the Mathnawi? Why is all of that there? And why is that when we go to our religious sites of place, our religious places of worship in our sites, that same holisticness is no longer there? What happened, right? That's something that we have to ask. Who took your language from you? Who took it from you, right? Who allowed you to be in the condition that you are today? When we all die and we go into barzakh, and we meet our ancestors, will they even be able to understand us? Maybe in Barzakh we speak one language, Allahu A'lam. Maybe when they speak, if you have Mughal descent, you're either speaking Farsi or Hindi or some proto form of Urdu, would you even be able to speak to them in the Barzakh? Right? And again, and this is just something to reclaim, right? And because if we don't do it, who will do it? Isn't there a haqq upon us as Muslims? Doesn't the living have a right, but also the dead have a right too? Right? When the Holy Prophet said, Al-Jannatu tahta aqdama ummahatikum, that paradise lies underneath the feet of your mothers, it's not necessarily sif zindagi mein, hatta ke maut maybe, that you go to her qabr and you make dua and you read Surah Yasin. And so sorry for taking so much time, but I think it's so important for us to have a reckoning, right? And to understand that most of the Quran is about the past. Very, very few ayat are about the future, like either Shamsu Kubirat and Wama min Dabba, etc. Most of the Quran is about the past. So when people say that, Muslims romanticize and glorify the past, why are they always focused on the past? What they don't understand is that we get our ethical values from the past. The best generation is the Prophet's generation, and then the one that succeeds them. So let us always remember that. And this is not to prevent us from taraqi, but again, let us reconnect with our mothers. Let us reconnect and do sila rahmi with our mothers. And one who was a better mother to the ummah than Maulana Rumi? Who was a better mother? I mean, obviously the prophets, right? But who took that rahmah and that shafqat for the ummah and gave his whole life so that you and I could live with beauty and joy? But sorry, go ahead.
MashaAllah, we have those very humble speakers. They didn't want any introduction. Waris Fazlayar, MashaAllah, is joining us from Toronto. It's ethnic Afghan, speaks Farsi, and is going to be teaching us a little bit about Rumi's life. And I know for people who just came in, there's some chai and some snacks in the back. Please feel free. We'll continue our program right now. Just one more thing I wanted to add about the necessity of having a deeper understanding of Rumi is that we are contextually located in 2022 in Illinois. Rumi is a name that most people recognize. So having an authentic understanding of him as a Muslim will give us more opportunity to connect with our peers. So oftentimes when somebody asks me for a quote for anything that I have to publicly present, it's something from Rumi. And I do use that opportunity to open the door. So without further ado, Brother Waris.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having us tonight. It's great to be here. Thank you for coming up, folks. Thank you to folks who are online. I hope I'm not going to have to look at myself in this thing the whole time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you for coming out. It's a pleasure to be here. Definitely share the sentiments that have been shared so far. This importance on understanding our past. It's through our past that we understand ourselves today. We move into the future. Otherwise, it's like a tree without a root, right? Any wind that blows, it'll make it fall over. So I won't add too much to that, but very, very much in agreement with what we've heard so far. And absolutely looking forward to sharing a little bit tonight with you folks. Reading through the Masnavi itself. I'll start off by giving a brief introduction to the life of Maulana Rumi, and then we'll also give a little bit of just context to the Masnavi, which we'll be reciting from tonight, and then we'll actually go ahead and recite it and provide some commentary and translation for you folks. So just to start from the very beginning, Maulana Jalaluddin al-Balkhi Rumi, born in present-day Balkh in northern Afghanistan in the early 13th century. He was born to a father who was known as Sultan Bahauddin Balkh, who himself was a scholar in his own right and a giant. He lived in Balkh at the time, and Balkh, just for context, was known as al-Bilad at that time, the mother of cities. It was a city full of scholars and learning and knowledge. And
Ibrahim ibn Adham.
If we were to go into it, there are very many, but you can even just do a scan of the names of scholars, and you'll notice many al-Balkhi at the end. They were from Balkh, or they lived in Balkh, they resided in Balkh. But at that specific time in history, there was an imminent threat which caused Sultan Bahauddin Balkh to move his family from Balkh and move westward. So we're looking at the time when the Mongol invasions were taking place across Central Asia and into Iran, and the Mongols were known to be very, very fierce and merciless fighters and warriors and foes. They were not folks who adhered to really any understanding of rules of warfare that we are familiar with. There was no treating prisoners with kindness and feeding them or anything like that. In fact, it was the very opposite. Women, children, the elderly, the sick, trees, plants, crops, animals, everything you can think of was murdered, was massacred, was destroyed, annihilated. This was the Rasim, this was the way of the Mongols. And so Sultan Bahauddin Walad, realizing that it was only a matter of time before the city of Balkh, where he resided, fell to the Mongol invaders, decided that it was time to move. And he took his family, the young Jalaluddin with him, his entire family, moved across Central Asia and the Iranian plateau, eventually settling in present-day Konya. Konya, today located in Turkey, at that time was the capital of the Rumi Seljuk Empire. So just a quick historical note, there was no Ottoman Empire at this time, there was no Ottoman polity, no Ottoman state really. In fact, Osman Ghazi himself, which the Ottoman state is named after, he was either a young child or perhaps not even born at that time, or at the very most maybe a young man, but not anyone of political repute by that time. His father, who I think many of us now are familiar with thanks to the popular television series Ertugrul, was contemporaneous. So he was active at that time, but again, there was no Ottoman state or polity. Istanbul was still Constantinople and had not been penetrated by the Muslims. So it's really a border, a frontier land. They went from one border frontier land where the Mongols were close by on the other side in Balkh to Konya, where now on the other side you had the Byzantine Christians who were ruling from Constantinople. Now, they settled down there, and as I mentioned, Sultan Bahauddin Walad himself was a scholar, renowned in his own right, a Hanafi Mufti, and he was given a post in the city of Konya by the Sultan of the Rum Seljuks, and he was the Sadr Mufti, he was the head scholar in the city.
You can think about it as like the dean of a religious college.
That's a good modern comparison to make the dean of a religious college. He was the head religious figure in the city, really. And it's there that he continued to operate and train students and carry out his life. And the young Jalaluddin was sent to Aleppo and to Damascus to undertake his studies and become a master of the Islamic sciences. So it was there that he studied fiqh, aqidah, tafsir, Quran, hadith, really all you can think of. He became a master of the Islamic sciences, and that will become hopefully a little bit more clear to us as we read from his text. We'll see how intertwined the Islamic sciences, particularly the Quran and the Hadith, are within the works that he's produced. Jalaluddin returns to Konya, and after the passing of his father, takes over his post. Again, he's the head religious scholar in the polity, the state, if we can call it that. And life goes on for him as per normal until a specific event takes place. He meets a very specific person who really turns his life upside down. I want to turn it over to the audience. Can anyone shout out the name? Do you know who he meets?
Shams Tabriz.
Shams Tabriz. I'm very pleased to hear that. You know, at other gatherings we had silence, or maybe one or two people. Maybe over here we had an echo of the name of Shams Tabriz.
Very active masajid.
Yes. Alhamdulillah. So he meets a specific Shams Tabriz, and there's a line of poetry that actually comes later. It's not from Mawlana himself, but I'll recite it for you. It says, Mawlawi hargiz nashad Mawlai Rum. Mawlawi hargiz nashad Mawlai Rum, ta ghulam Shams Tabrizi nashad. He says that Maulana Rumi would have never become the Mawla of Rum. He never would have become the master of Rum, of where he was, until he became the ghulam, until he became the servant of Shams Tabriz. So what is it that the Shams Tabriz has done to him that has turned his life upside down and made him into really the figure that we know today? Shams, it's important to note, was not somebody who perhaps appeared much like the traditional idea of a religious scholar. He was not somebody who was dressed in robes and walked with his held high, with his chest up, and had an entourage of people around him. Say, when you entered a room, everybody knew, oh, this is Shams Tabriz, perhaps. Rather, quite the opposite. He was quite darwishi in appearance. He appeared like an ordinary man, perhaps even amongst the ordinary of the lower rungs of people, perhaps an outcast, perhaps somebody who was not, the most accepted within the main culture and society. And Shams and Maulana meet, and Maulana is immediately taken by Shams. He's completely transformed. They spend a period of 40 days and 40 nights, chilla as we know it, literally coming from the word chill, meaning 40. in deep study, in meditation and learning, and he emerges zero zabar, as he says. He's completely zero zabar. His life has been flipped, turned upside down. His eyes have been opened to something that he did not see before, despite all of the knowledge that he had even then. And Maulana now begins to recite poetry. So on poetry, I'll just make a quick note here that at that time, it wasn't very common for poets to be associated with spirituality as we sort of think of it today. Rather, primarily, poets were people who were employed by the sultan or the local governor, and they would produce panegyrics, they would produce odes, they would write poetry in praise of the sultan. They would produce, beautiful poetry so that it could be sung for the sultan, and he was paid in accordance to that. There were, of course, poets who wrote from a spiritual place and spiritual context. Sheikh Fariduddin Attar and Shahpur, whom Maulana met when he was a young man or a young boy, he had by then already written his famous work, the Mantuq al-Tayr, or the Conference of the Birds, as we translated into English, a giant work in and of itself. But again, by and far, poetry was not something that was a spiritual practice per se. Now, Maulana, having emerged from this period, is separated from Shams. Shams is gone, he disappears, and out of this separation, Maulana starts to feel something in him that inspires him to produce this poetry. His students write it out for him, it's preserved for us, we have it here with us today. I know Maulana Salih would like to make a note about the coming together of Shams and Maulana and relating it to Imam Salih. Please speak about that.
Yeah, just very quickly, we have to remember that, as Ustad Wanis mentioned, that the worlds of tasawwuf and traditional Islamic learning were not synthesized at that point. Imam Ghazali achieved that in his extremely brilliant, singular life, but that is still not the reality on the ground, because for someone's ideas to trickle down into society, as one Reagan taught us, but takes a while, right? So even though this is 100 years later, Imam Rumi is born 100 years after Imam Ghazali passes away, may Allah have mercy on the both. Imam Rumi then becomes a singular figure by which, being a Hanafi Mufti, being a chief Hanafi Mufti of an entire province, of the capital of an empire, and him coming into the tasawwuf allows this bridging, allows this dialogue between traditional Islamic learning and tasawwuf, which we now see today. 400 years later, the Sufi and the Alim oftentimes are the same person. But that can only start because of people like Maulana Rumi and Shams al-Tabriz, who are doing this bridging. As the Masnawi later on, it said, Ay Musa, tu barai wasal kardan al-Nadi. Na barai fasal kardan al-Nadi. What do the prophets come for? Ay Musa alayhi salam, you have come to unite people. You have come to unite traditions. You have come to bring everything into dialogue with each other. That's why the Quran is really a book of dialogue. The most common word in the Quran is actually the word qala. It means he said. We can think about the dialogue of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun on the third page of Surah Shu'ara. قال قل هاتوا برهانكم قال الذين وقال الذين أوتوا العلم وقال etc. etc. And so this is a personification. And again, I just don't know how to emphasize how critical, how crucial Maulana Rumi is, and there is no one born like him after. Yeah.
And so it's after this meeting with Shams, after this union and then this separation that Maulana I mentioned starts to produce poetry, and he's got his Diwan al-Shams, which is a collection of ghazals. He's got the Masnawi Ma'nawi, which we'll go through today, the opening passage of it, and he's got the Fihi Mafi. He has a lot of works, but really the Masnawi is actually a type of poetry, but this is the Masnawi in the sense that when you say Masnawi now, nobody thinks of the type of poetry, rather they think of the specific, the Masnawi and Ma'nawi. So on the topic of the Masnawi, just before we get into it, I'll share a little bit about the work itself. The Masnawi is composed in a rhyming meter, as a Masnawi is, where it's A, so each line rhymes with itself. The two hemistitches rhyme with each other, which allows for one to write a very long work. So this is about 50,000 lines. On the opposite end, you have a ghazal say, which can only be so long because the first word, that first line, it needs to continue going down, right? It'll alternate out of rhyme, but then back in, out of rhyme, and back in. So it's not able to be very long, like an epic or a Masnawi is. But that's the rhyming scheme of it. Now the Masnawi is called the Quran in Farsi. They say Masnawi, Ma'nawi, Mawlawi has Quran در زبان پهلوی نیست پیغمبر ولی دارد کتاب. The meaning of which is the Masnawi and Ma'nawi of Maulana is the Quran in Pahlavi. Pahlavi is the word for the Middle Persian language before it became the Farsi that we know today. Prior to the 10th century AD, it was known as Pahlavi, but the idea is that it's Farsi. Saying it's the Quran in Farsi, and he says that he's not a prophet. Payghambar names Payghambar. But he has a book. Now, what do we mean by this? It's not hyperbole. It's not to, rustle feathers or to make you think, oh, this is a more grand book than it really is or something like that. But rather, as we'll see when we dive into this, the Masnavi has direct references to the Quran. Maulana brings actual ayat from the Quran into his poetry and rhymes it into fitting exactly within the meter. This is, an appreciation for this is really required, and we'll see when we read, in that it's not an easy thing to do. One, to write a meter period and to rhyme, but to then take, another language, take ayat from the Quran, which are direct and insert it into the word. There's over 600 references to the Quran, over 600 references to the Hadith. And in fact, in this opening portion, we won't read this line today, but there is a portion which says, which, if you want, actually, let's share the exact line from the Quran.
Yeah. So the ayat Quran فلما تجلى ربه للجبل جعله دكا وخر موسى صعقا. When Allah did the tajalli of himself on the mountains, جعله دكا became reza ho gaya, it became into smithereens. وخر موسى صعقا. Musa alayhi salam fell down, thunderstruck.
And so that's a direct insertion from the ayah into the poetry. Like I mentioned, there's reference to hadith, and then in addition, there's a ton of allusions to the Quran indirectly, where the average reader who isn't perhaps closely familiar with the Quran and the hadith would not pick up on this. But if you are familiar, say if you're Hafiz and you can make the connection, you see the words or you understand in Farsi this word in the Arabic translation, there's a connection to the Quran, you will understand and pick up on some of that. So it really is a book with many, many layers. There's when reading this kind of poetry, first we will assess and we will see the top layer, what we call the qarib meaning, the near meaning, and then there's the ba'id. There's that which lies beyond, which requires some feeling back, which requires some understanding beyond what the surface level says. So I think with that, we can perhaps begin. I'll pass it over to my Imam Salih, who will read for us from the Masnavi.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. شروع میکنم از نام خداوند جلیل، جهان خداوند آسمان، خداوند زمین. صلوات بی حدود و بی محدود بر پیغمبر عربی هاشمی قرشی مطلبی علیه افضل الصلوات و اکمل التحیات. و طلب میکنیم و توسل میکنیم از خداوند که هر خیر، هر سعادت، هر برکت که آید از این قرائت، از این تشریح، از بر روح مولانا جلال الدین رومی بفرما و بخشاند در عیسا. و هر خطا موجود است از این قرائت، از خطای ماست، از کوتاه ماست. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. بشنو از نی چون حکایت میکند، بشنو از نی چون حکایت میکند، از جدای ها شکایت میکند. کز نیستان تا مرا ببریده اند، در نفیرم مرد و زن نالیده اند. سینه خواهم شرح از فراق، تا بگویم شرح درد اشتیاق. هر کسی بود دور ماند از اصل خویش، باز جوید روزگار وصل خویش. من به هر جمعیت نالان شدم، جفت بدحالان و خوشحالان شدم. هر کس از زن خود شد یار من، هر کس از زن خود شد یار من. از درون من نجست اسرار من. سر من از ناله من دور نیست، سر من از ناله من دور نیست. لیک چشم و گوش را آن نور نیست. تن ز جان و جان ز تن مستور نیست، لیک کس را دید جان دستور نیست. آتش است این بانگ نای نیست باد، هر که این آتش ندارد نیست باد. آتش عشق است که اندر می فتاد، آتش عشق است که اندر می فتاد. جوشش عشق است که اندر می فتاد. نی حریف هر که از یاری برید، پرده های ما درید. همچون زهری و تریاکی که دید، همچونه زهری و تریاقی که دید همچونه دمساز و مشتاقی که دید نی حدیث راهی پرخون می کند قصه های عشق مجنون می کند نی حدیث راهی پرخون می کند قصه های عشق مجنون می کند محرم این هوش جز به هوش نیست محرم این هوش جز به هوش نیست مر زبان را مشتری جز گوش نیست در غم ما روزها بیگاه شد در غم ما روزها بیگاه شد روزها با سوزها همراه شد روزها گرفت گورو باک نیست توبه مان ای آنکه چون تو پاک نیست هر که جز ماهی ز آبش سیر شد هر که بی روزیش روزش دیر شد در نیابد حال پخته هیچ خام در نیابد حال پخته هیچ خام پس سخن کوتاه باید و السلام. I think we'll just go into the commentary, just translate it line by line. Or do you want to
read it one time?
Do you want to read it one time? Go ahead.
I've got-
Read the English.
So I'll read the English translation of what we just read, and then we'll do a line-by-line commentary. This translation is by Ustad Jalil Mujahidi, so it's a little pleasant to hear. That's why I wanted to share it. It's also not a little pleasant. It's in rhyme and it's in meter, so it'll be interesting to hear. And then, don't worry if you don't pick up on all of it. I'm just going through it quickly. We'll go through it line by line, inshallah. So he says, "Now listen to this reed flute's deep lament about the heartache being apart has meant. Since from the reed bed they uprooted me, my songs expressed each human's agony. A breast which separation split in two is what I seek to share this pain with you. When kept from their true origin, all yearn for union on the day they can return. Amongst the crowd alone I mourn my fate. With good and bad I've learned to integrate. That we were friends, each one was satisfied, but none sought out my secrets from inside. My deepest secrets in this song I wail, but eyes and ears can't penetrate the veil. Body and soul are joined to form one whole, but no one is allowed to see the soul. It's fire, not just hot air, the reed flute's cry. If you don't have this fire, then you should die. Love's fire is what makes each reed flute pine. Love's fervor thus lends potency to wine. The reed consoles those forced to be apart. Its notes will lift the veil upon your heart. Where's antidote or poison like its song, or confidant, or one who's pined so long? This reed relates a torturous path ahead, recalls with love with which Majnun's heart bled. The few who hear the truths the reed has sung have lost their wits so they can speak this tongue. The day is wasted if it's spent in grief, consumed by burning aches without relief. Good times have long passed, but we couldn't care. When you're with us, our friend beyond compare. While ordinary men on drops can thrive, a fish needs oceans daily to survive. The way the right must feel, the raw can't tell. My speech must be concise, and so farewell."
Thank you so much. So yeah, we'll just alternate. We'll do two lines, so that
There's one thing, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A because I see a lot of people with some comments or questions. So yeah,
What is it?
we'll have some opportunity for question and answer and comments.
I need 5 minutes.
We'll continue it right now. Okay.
Inshallah, we'll get into it for sure. We'd
Yeah,
love to. Yeah, but let's begin with the reading.
Bismillah. So
Did you
Sorry.
want to start or?
Sure, I don't mind, sir. Yeah, we can begin. So he says from the beginning, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, بشنو از نی چون حکایت میکند از جدایی ها شکایت میکند کز نیستان تا مرا ببریده‌اند از نفیرم مرد و زن نالیده‌اند. The translation of which is, listen, Bishna. So there's a lot to unpack. Even just we're going to stop right here on this very first word, Bishna. It starts with the letter Ba. We know that Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi al-Balkhi was a master in the Islamic sciences. It's no coincidence that he begins with the letter Ba, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, right? Bishna. What else do we know from just our basic sort of elementary Islamic education? We know that the very first revelation that was revealed to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was Iqra. It was a command, read, right? And here we're commanded to listen. So interestingly, this contrast, Bishna, listen. And the way the meter, just getting into the real literary parts of it here, the meter is such that this is Bishna. The emphasis is on the word before you move to the next word. But it says Bishna was night. Listen to the reed flute as it tells a tale. از جدایی ها شکایت میکنه. The complaints of separations. So already there's this theme of separation that has come in. He says, کز نیستان تا مرا بریده‌اند. He says, ever since they cut me from the reed bed, از نفیرم مرد و زن نالیده‌اند. From my lament, men and women, all of humanity has been lamenting, they've been wailing, they've been in sorrow. So immediately what he's done is he's saying, listen to the reed flute, it's going to tell a story of separations. And then he says, since they cut me from the reed bed, I have been lamenting and people are joining me in my lament. So there's something that we'll want to keep in mind. It seems that Maulana is establishing himself here as a reed, as a flute, which is going to tell a story. And we're going to want to listen to it, and it's about separation.
Yeah, Bismillah. Another thing to keep in mind is that in that same surah, Surah Iqra, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الَّذِي عَلَّمَهُ بِالْقَلَمِ. Now, qalam in Arabic actually means qata'a. So, for example, the Holy Prophet said one of the 10 things from Fitrah is qalamul adfar, or cutting your nails. So this idea of cutting and an allusion to the Quran of the qalam is also present here. That because in order to make a reed flute, you have to cut it from the reed bed, right? So this idea of the qalam, right, of cutting, so that we're literally being separated, right? And as we'll explain more and more, that we as human beings, as people with souls, have been cut off from our origin, right? Which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And any person cut off, right, wants to reunite. And this idea of the union and reuniting then becomes absolutely central and paramount. And this idea of shikayat, a lot of us unfortunately think that shikayat is an un-Islamic thing, whereas in the Quran, the great prophet Sayyidina Yaqub alayhi salam says, قال إنما أشكو بثي وحزني إلى الله. قال إنما أشكو بثي وحزني إلى الله. Oh, I complain of my grief to Allah. So this is a prophetic sunnah. In fact, we can say shikayat is a sunnah of the prophets. قال إنما, again, قال إنما أشكو. Obviously, Iqbal will take shikwa further than anyone else, I think. But it's so important for whatever reason we have lost the ability to understand shikayat as a sunnah of Sayyidina Yaqub alayhi salam. And more importantly, Maulana Rumi begins with grief. Because as the Holy Prophet said, and Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani mentioned this in his Bari, that نُزِلَ الْقُرْآنُ بِالْحُزْنِ. The Quran, يعني غم se utara. It was descended with grief, right? And as Muslims, we have a unique relationship with grief. We carry it because we are cut off from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and as the millat bayza, as the shining millah, we understand where the return is. How much in the Quran does Allah say, وَإِلَيْنَا تُرْجَعُونَ? Allah never says, وَإِلَيْنَا تَذْهَبُونَ, right?
Actually, yeah. And on that note, so Kazna Iston told Marab doing that, right? He says, listen to the night. He establishes that he's night. He says, since they cut me from the root bed, right? This origin, which we'll see come up, but he's been cut from the Naistan, which there's also perhaps a reference here to another hadith, which no one, as you want to elucidate upon, but the idea that in the time, or I guess I can't say in the time, but the time was before time was created, before creation was made, right? In sorry?
Alam
al-Arwah, or the Quranic reference, this being Alastu bi Rabbikum, right? We understand this as a primordial gathering, we call it in English, where our souls were aligned, much like if you've seen a Nayastan or a reed bed where reeds grow, they're kind of all gathered up in the same way that we imagine our souls having been gathered up through generations that come to us. On that day, we call it in Farsi the Rose Alas, right? From that Quranic verse, Alastu bi Rabbikum, am I not your Lord? Or I know in Turkish, the Qawd al-Bala, right? The covenant of Bala, of acceptance, and yes, where we take an oath. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on that day offers the test of existence and particularly of free will to much of creation. The mountains say no, the Malaika say no, they don't want this test, but the human beings accept this, right? Alastu bi Rabbikum, am I not your Lord? Do you not testify? We say Bala, we say Bala, or in Persian today we say Bala, meaning yes.
In Punjabi we say Balle.
In Punjabi, Bala,
Punjabi Balle actually
yes.
is the Arabic Bala.
So all from the same root, it means yes, we accept this covenant with Allah that we're going to accept this test, come on this earth, and that's our origin, that uncreated origin. The Nayastan he's talking about, he's saying since that day, men and women have been in a state of lamentation, of wailing, of sorrow. And so he continues, perhaps I think in the next line here. Sure.
Okay. Yeah, in the next line he says, Sina khaham sharha azfira, tabaguyam sharhe darde ishtiyaq. That my heart wants to be cut. And again, this idea of cutting, of being separated. Sina khaham sharha azfira. My heart wants to be cut because of firaq, because of being separated, right? And again, you can think of this idea of Majnoon beating his chest, that Dashte Najd or Dashte Sahra, beating his chest in the desert for Layla. Just really quickly, we all know the story of Majnoon Layla, but there's a couplet of Mirza Ghalib where we all talk about how Majnoon was pining for Layla, etc. But he has one, I forget the exact Urdu, but in the second line he says, Khana-e Majnoon Sahra Gardi Bay Darwaza Tha. He said, who stopped Layla from going to visit Majnoon? Majnoon never had a door in his house, so why did Layla ever go and visit Majnoon? But that's the idea, right? That you're always being tortured by the mahbub, by the beloved. So Muhammad says that I want my chest to be split open from separation, and as we discussed yesterday, this is an allusion to which surah in the Quran? Anybody guess? Alam nashrah laka sadrak. Very alam. Alam nashrah laka sadrak. Have we not split open your heart? Alam nashrah laka sadrak. So already 3 surahs, right? And within 6 lines. Who can do that? Sina khaham sharha azfira, ta baguyam sharh dard ishtiyaq. Why? Kis maqsad ke liye? That I can explain to you or give you a sharh. So he plays on the words of sharha and sharah. I can give you a commentary on the grief of yearning. Because, you taught me this yesterday, that you can't really understand missing something unless you've experienced it. And all of us, ek fitrati cheez hai, ek jibillati cheez hai hamare andar, that we all want to go back home, but the Holy Prophet told us how. Right? And that's the fitra. Fitrat Allah alladhi fatara an-nasa alayha. This idea, this yearning. And so that yearning, that fitra, Mawlana says, Ta baguyam sharh darde ishtiyaq. And this idea, if you were reading this, if you were a faqih, you were like, okay, sharh, usually you do sharh of fiqh, you do sharh of kalam, you do sharh of mantiq, right? But what about sharh of grief? What about a commentary of grief, right? And as Muslims again, right, this idea of that grief of Sayyidina Ayyub alayhi salam, of Sayyidina Yaqub alayhi salam, of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, of our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, who buried all of his kids alive, or all of his kids, I said that improperly, he saw all of his kids pass away before him besides Sayyidina Fatima. What does that mean as a father to see all of your kids pass away? Do you know how much grief he had to carry? To see all of your kids pass away besides one daughter, right? 3 daughters and 2 sons passed away before his eyes. And he himself was had to bury them, alayhi salatu wassalam. And so every prophet had to deal with more grief than any of us can ever imagine. So let us listen to how Maulana Rumi does a sharah, does a commentary of that grief, because the Prophet just wants to take us home. And I quote from the great Chishti Sufi of Hindustan, Abdul Quddus Gangohi. He says, Payghambar ba asman raft wa baz amad. Agar meravan baz na. He says the Holy Prophet went to Allah, yani qaba qawsayn, sidratul muntaha, wapis aaye. He came back. If I had gone back to meet Allah, I would have never been able to come back. And that's what makes the Holy Prophet the Prophet of God, because he has come to build an ummah for millenniums.
Actually, very fitting. The next line says, Har kase ko dur mand az asl khish, baz joyad rozgar wasl khish. Whomsoever remains separated from their origin, they will seek out that day, that time again when they can be reunited. So the seeking out of reunification with our origin, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's just, I think the explanation you gave there was very good. Shall we move on to the next line then? It says here, Man bahar jam'iyate nalan shudam. Jufte bad halan khush halan shudam. Har kase az zann khud shud yar man. Az darun man najas asrar man. Or najas asrar man. Can be read both ways, both having different meanings. Like I mentioned, there's the layers that we have to unpack here. But he says, I was present in many gatherings. I went to many different jam'iyat. And he says, I became one. I became one. Just the khush halan bad halan shudam. I became one with those who were in a good state, khushhal, or happy in a good state, and those who were in a bad hal, those who were unwell. The meanings of these can be multifold. The khushhalan being those who are aware of the divine realities as I sat with them, or perhaps those who are blissfully ignorant, or perhaps the bad halan are those who are unaware of the divine reality. Indeed, those are the real bad halan, but the ones who, on account of separation, perhaps are a bad hal, right? There's multiple meanings. We won't dive too deep into those, but rather we can see, he says, how can say azanna khudshud yarima? He says, everybody on account of their faulty assumptions assumed that they became my yar, they became my close companion. As daruniman najas asrariman, but they did not seek out from within me my secrets, or they did my secrets as daruniman najas asrariman, my secrets did not come out from me with them, right? And this is actually very topical to what we were talking about earlier, this idea of Maulana Rumi being somebody who, everybody loves him here in America, we could say, right? It's not a stretch to say that he's a best-selling, the translation or the interpretation of his work, which we can talk about later, is a bestseller. Everybody thinks they know Maulana Rumi. But how many people actually know Maulana Rumi? How many have gone beyond the surface, right? Even those who can read the original. I remember someone telling me, he says, my granduncle actually says, when we were back in Afghanistan, we would read the Masnavi because we liked the stories, it was very interesting. It was a great source of just something to read. It was a very enjoyable read. But we never, as many of us didn't look beyond to actually see what was being said in here, right?
Yeah, and this line here again evokes another hadith from Bukhari where he says, "Man bahara jam'iyyate nalon shuda." That in every gathering I was weeping, and because remember we're talking about what nisti and hasti, non-existent and existence. We still have the word hasti in existence in Urdu, right? We still use the word hasti in Urdu. It comes from the word Farsi, the word hast, and this is an allusion to the hadith in Bukhari where the Holy Prophet, may joy cradle him in Medina, said that al-arwahu junudun mujannada فمن اقتنس منها اقتنس فيها ومن اختلف منها أو في رواية أخرى ومن تناكر منها تناكر فيها. That we were all in junudun mujannada, camps, jam'iyya, right? What's that line in the shikwa? Jam'iyyat, khatir jam'iyyat bukya misra? I can't remember, but it's the same word, jam'iyya, in every gathering. And this idea of that in this gathering, we took, as Ustad Wadis beautifully said, that pact. In the Quran, we use the word mithaq. Does anybody know how we can, I translate a certain way, but the word mithaq, what does it evoke for you guys? The word mithaq, a covenant. وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ, right? But also, what's the other one? وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَكُمْ مِنْ نُوحٍ, sorry, من إبراهيم ومن نوح وإبراهيم وموسى وعيسى بن مريم وأخذنا منكم ميثاقا غليظا, right? That we took from these prophets a ميثاقا غليظا. إكسخ ميثاق हमने ली in पैगंबरों से, right? We took a covenant, right? It's more than a contract. One thing is contractual, one thing is an actual covenant, right? And this idea of that, in that day of Rozi Alas and Alamul Arwah, imagine all of us being together. And that's what Maulana Rumi wants to evoke in your mind, is that as a Muslim, because of the Quran, we know exactly what happened in pre-existence, and he wants to alert you. What did that day look like, right? What was the joy and what was the grief of that day? But anyways, he says, should I go on? Yeah. Sir Rayman as Nala man dur needs. Lake Chashma Gosh on Nur needs. My secret is not far from my lament. That my secret, the secret of Maulana, is contained in the grief of Maulana. Right? The secret of Maulana is contained, is intertwined and interlaced within the grief of Maulana. What is this grief? Like Chasham Goshra on Nur needs. But do you have the light to see? Chasham obviously is eyes. Gosh is ear. We have the word in Urdu, Hamatan Gosh. Keep your whole body as an ear. But if you can't listen to the light or hear the light, then how can you understand his secrets? Like Maulana Rumi has another line where he says, Chasham ban, Gosh ban, Lab ban, Agar, Nur haq na ayat barman bakhan. Close your eyes from sin. Close your ears from sin. Right? Close your mouth from sin. If the light of Allah does not enter your heart, then stand in the streets and make a fool of me. Chasham ban, lab ban, Gosh ban, Gar Nur haq na ayat barman bakhan. Laugh at me in the streets. Right? And how much did the Holy Prophet emphasize? right? These pathways, because what else do we want in this world than the light of Allah? Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. What is it? That's to look at Maulana Rumi's life is to look at a life who lived with Nur Khudawan, with Nur Allah, right? To live with the light of Allah, right? And how that can transform you, right? How that can totally shift you, right? Doesn't the Holy Prophet say that the slave of Allah comes closer and closer, then Allah becomes the eyes by which he sees, the ears by which he hears, the mouth by which he talks. One of du'as of the Holy Prophet was, Allahumma ja'al a'ayni noora, Allahumma ja'al lahmi noora, Allah, make my eyes light, make my skin light, make my flesh light, right? And so the secrets, as Waris just mentioned, it's almost as if he knew that he would be so violently misread, and I use the word violence very intentionally, right? Because to remove all of the Quran and all of the Sunnah from Maulana is to remove the secrets of Maulana, right? And to remove that grief. And as we mentioned in an earlier program today, one of the main reasons why Maulana Rumi was so violently mistranslated was because all of these Western European non-Muslim scholars who were so awestruck by Maulana could never believe that the joy and the beauty in the Mathnawi came from the Holy Prophet. They could never believe that a desert man of Arabia could produce Islamic civilization like this. They could never wrap their heads around this. That it was the Quran and the Sunnah that gave the beauty and joy of Maulana Rumi to the world. And so what did they do? They did a qata. They cut us off.
سر من از ناله من دور نیست، لیک چشم و گوش را آن نور نیست. تن ز جان و جان ز تن مستور نیست، لیک کس را دید جان دستور نیست. He says that my lament, my nala, is not far from my sir, from my secret, right? That nala being his words which we're hearing, this is a nala, it's a lament, but also the sound of the flute, right? For those who are familiar with the sound of the night, even culturally, it's understood that the night is a sad sounding instrument. In fact, I know someone told me that back in Afghanistan, her grandmother did not allow her sons to play the tula or the nai, the tula we call it, because the understanding is that if you play this instrument, you're going to become somebody who's always ghamgeen, who's always sorrow and sad, because it's a sad sounding instrument. But he says that my secret is not far from this, and then he elucidates everything. He says that the body, the tan, and the John, the soul, are not far from each other. They're not hidden. The literal transition is the body and the soul and the body are not veiled from one another, right? And if we just take a look around and look at ourselves, we see, okay, the body is here, and you can all see, you can tell that I have a soul. I can tell that all of you have a soul. Nobody's lacking a soul. We know that it's all there. However, Lake Kasra di the John Dasturnes, but can you see the soul? You cannot see the soul, right? You require that inner vision, that basirat, that di the John, to be able to see the soul, or the sit, in this case, of what he's trying to bring forward and elucidate for us. He continues in the next line saying, sorry, it says, I skipped one. آتش است این بانگ نای و نیست باد، هر که این آتش ندارد نیست باد. آتش عشق است کاندر نیفتاد، جوشش عشق است کاندر می فتاد. So the beginning he says, آتش است این بانگ نای و نیست باد. The bong at night, the sound or the call, the lament of the flute here, he says, it is fire, it is not wind. So let's think about a flute for a moment, right? The flute, you blow into it, there's wind. It's a wind instrument, wind comes out. He says, no, it's not wind, it is fire. Artashas being bong and it's not wind. So what does he mean? I mean, you ever seen someone blow into a flute and fire come out of it? Of course not. But we have to think, fire is purifying. We'll see that come up in a moment here, right? But he says, آتش است این بانگ نای و نیست باد، هر که این آتش ندارد نیست باد. Whosoever does not possess this fire, the fire that comes from the night, he says, may they die, may they not be. Neis bad. You've heard the term zinda bad, right? Or things bad, right? Or something bad. It means let it be. Neis bad, let it not be, let him die. So he's saying, if you do not possess this fire, the fire of separation that he's talking about, then may you die. He's not wishing a death upon us in the literal sense, but may you die in the sense that may that part of you, that lower self, the nafs, the part of you that distracts you from the divine reality, may that die, right? And that is what fire does, like I mentioned, it purifies. It gets rid of the chiki, of the bacteria, of the impurities in order to purify. We see this in cooking, we see this in chemistry, and it continues. It is the fire of ishq, of love, which fell into the Nile. It is the boiling of ishq, of love, that falls into the wine and gives it its properties that make it potent and make it intoxicating. Right? What is wine? Wine is grape juice. It doesn't do anything to you. You can drink all the grape juice you want. You're going to be fine. You're not going to be intoxicated. That's not a fatwa for me. I can't do that. But you can drink all the grape juice you want. Nothing's going to happen. But if it becomes fermented and it's boiled, there's a boiling process associated with it. He's saying that is the boiling of love that falls into that and makes you intoxicated. It gives it that intoxicating feature, right? So wine here, in the spiritual sense, not necessarily in the literal sense, but we understand it through the process of literal wine making, right? Of sharab, of mai. He says that's love that causes it to do that, right? And so there's a lot to be said about this, but I want to see if Malani has anything to add.
I think we're just going to pause it here for Q&A, then we're going to resume it.
Sure.
Yeah, so some 2-minute break, and then we can start on the day. How do you think?
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I just wanted to give everybody a breather. You know, that was very heavy. We're going to continue with this in a few moments. But any comments, Q&A?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wa khida. Bakhshinda wa mehriban. برادران و خواهرات خوش آمدید میکنیم. من خیلی خوشحال شدم که شما دیدید کردید فارسی را شما گفتن. من خیلی خوشحال شدم که تمام را ببینم و شنیدم. من بچه اصفهان دوست جهان. من فارسی خیلی خوب بلدم ولكن فراموش کردم. خیلی ممنونم و متشکرم که شما اینجا آمدید. من خیلی خوشحال شدم.
ممنون. خیلی ممنون.
متشکرم.
Assalamu alaikum. It's just really, I'm amazed to hear all these words that, I'm from Islam, but my grandpa has to have these huge books that he used to carry in his library, and it was all written in Farsi. So while I was a kid, I used to look at it. I can read and write Urdu, but there are so many words that are so similar to it. So, and when I take a look about this, it just amazed me that within few sentences, it's talking so much. The Rumi, the poet, is talking so much. So as a person, I have read and something similar, not real much, but what do you guys recommend regarding to really get the knowledge from this book or of its writings regarding Islam and his teaching that he really reflected? So that would be, I'd like to learn about that. So that would be very important for me to know. Thank you very much for all your
Good question. What do you recommend for learning more on Rumi and furthering your understanding of it?
Absolutely, I would have to answer that or take a first pass. So when it comes to reading the Masnavi specifically, if you're interested in learning more about it, my number one recommendation always is to be able to read a text in the original language, right? So this is not some kind of nationalist propaganda. If it's an Arabic book, I say read it in Arabic. If it's Turkish, learn the Turkish. If it's Farsi, Urdu, whatever, it's always best if we can read it in its original language. Now, of course, that might not be possible for everyone, but for those who may have some background, my encouragement, number one, is to build on those language skills and take it. So my second suggestion then is that if you are not able to access the original language, try to read it in a language close to it. So for example, I imagine most folks here, a lot of folks perhaps are familiar with Urdu. Urdu and Farsi are closely tied together. A lot of the cultural concepts translate into one another very seamlessly, right? Perhaps even there are proverbs and sayings and quotes and things of that sort between, Farsi, Urdu, Arabic, Turkish, because culturally they were related languages. It's a lot easier if you're able to read, for example, a Urdu translation or an Arabic translation along with like a commentary. That would be perhaps the best way to approach it. And then lastly, if none of those avenues are available to someone and they want to read it in English, then I personally recommend either translation by Nicholson. The Nicholson translation is the first, I believe, translation. It's a very well done translation, but it might be a little bit harder to read. It's a bit more an antiquated version of English. It's a little bit older. So the newer version, you heard the one I read from earlier, that's by Ustad Jawed Mujaddidi. Jawed Mujaddidi's translation is in rhyme, it's in meter, it's contemporary to our day today, so it's written sort of more plain and easy to follow along English. And then that would be my recommendation, to try and read it in those three languages along with some commentary.
Yeah. And another thing to remember, and I always say people ask this question, is that when we ask about how do I read Maulana, I think a better question needs to be that how can we all read Maulana? And definitely needs to be a community effort. And I always suggest people, institutions, funds, hire an Iranian or an Afghan ustaz. There are so many of them. They will teach people. There should be nothing wrong with learning as an adult. Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi was 30, 40 years old when he gave up everything to study with Shams al-Tabriz. We need to destigmatize adult learning. It's okay to keep on learning until you die. Another thing for Urdu specifically is Maulana Ashmi Khanwi's Khalid Masnavi. It's an 8-volume Urdu commentary. I would argue it's probably the best Urdu commentary in Maulana, but it's very, very high Urdu. It's basically Farsi at that point, just the words hey and ta. Everything else is pretty much, but and I'll say that if you already know Urdu, I'm third generation American Muslim. My grandparents came to Chicago in the 60s. We only spoke English at home. No Urdu. My parents are almost anti-Urdu, very English-loving people. So I had to sort of study this on my own. And I think as like a third generation American Muslim, if I can study Urdu and Farsi, I feel like anybody can. And especially if you know Urdu, Farsi is very, very accessible. And I will say this, the beauty and the joy that I got from studying Farsi, I didn't get it. I don't know if I can, as a Hyderabadi Muslim, I love Urdu, but true and very neutrally as someone who's born and raised in California, the beauty that comes with studying Farsi and all of the Arabic Fusha words, because I came to Farsi after Arabic and Urdu, is just so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And there's a reason why Allama Iqbal, he wrote 12,000 lines of poetry, he wrote 7,000 in Farsi and 5,000 in Urdu, and he, as he himself says, Agarche Urdu shakaras, tarz guftari dari shirin taras. That even though Urdu is sugary, Farsi is so much sweeter. And or even the fact that we as Muslims, especially Indian Hyderabadi Muslims or North Indian Muslims, and Allama Iqbal speaks about this so much, that our civilization in that sanad, it goes through Iran. It goes through Iran, and as Indian Muslims, we need to take that seriously. That so much of our cultural values are from the ta'aruf and the takallufat of Iran, and this idea that a lot of Indian Muslims I see just try to skip Iran and go into Arabistan, it to me is like it's not right. The Quran is the word of Allah, hatman qata'an, but again, as an Indian Muslim, our culture and our civilization, so much, even the Arabic and the Quran was carried from Iran and Central Asia. And as Indian Muslims, we owe that debt to Iran. And I don't have any sharam sari or sharmindagi in saying that cutting off of Indian Muslims and Farsi tahzeeb and akhlaq is again a cutting off of astakhish as Indian Muslims. As Allama Iqbal said, tanam az khayaban jannat Kashmir, tanam az khayaban jannat Kashmir, dalam az haram Hijaz, wa nawa'am ash-Shiraz. He says, my body is from the paradise avenues of Kashmir, my heart is from the haram in Mecca, but my song and my music is from Shiraz. In another line he says, agarche zada'i hindam, even though I am a son of India, agarche zada'i hindam, farugh chashme manas, the light of my eyes, right? Farugh, the light of my eyes, zahake pake Bukhara, or Kabul or Tabriz, is from the dust of Bukhara and Kabul and Tabriz. And how many Muslims how many Indian Muslims actually care about these cities anymore? Mainly these three, Kabul, Bukhara, Tabriz, that gave us Islam, right? And so we need to reckon with that. Sorry, that was a longer answer, but I wanted to touch on some of those tahzeebi points.
We will continue on with our program now, so we'll try to close at 9.
20 minutes.
Yeah, 20 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll go. And we're a small group, so once we end the webcast, we'll continue our conversation. And I'd like to show everyone the facilities here, so stay tuned.
Okay, so we'll continue with Mahnawi. He says, "Nay hadise rahi kurkhun mein kunad, qissa hoy ishq majnoon mein kunad." The nay, the flute, it tells the stories of blood. Kurkhun, filled with blood, absolutely filled with blood. This road to the light of Allah, if you want that light of Allah, you need وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. And those who strive in our path, لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ, हम जरूर हतमन उनको हिदायत देंगे, हम उनको राह दिखलाएंगे. لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا, हमारे सब तरीके, سُبُلَنَا, this is जमा सिगा. ولا إن الله what's سُبُلَنَا وإن الله مع المحسنين. And Allah is good with those people who do ihsan. Right? And so this idea of kurkhun, be ready to shed blood. As you know, Waris very beautifully said yesterday, the Holy Prophet shed blood in Ta'if, alayhi salatu wassalam. Imam Hussein, radiallahu anhu, shed blood for us in Karbala. Right? And so, how many Muslims in India have shed blood for us for 800 years? Nay hadith rahi kurkhun mein kunad. Right? Qissa hoy ishq majnoon mein kunad, that tells the stories of the love of Majnoon. Right? And may we understand that love of Majnoon, right? And bring it into us so that we bleed metaphorically, right? For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is addressing, right? The shahawat and the khahishat of our lower nafs. Because once we conquer that, it's just Allah. And then we get to go back, right? Who doesn't want to go back home? As Maulana says, Yare malak bu da'een. We used to be friends. Hum farishton ke dost the. We used to be friends of the angels. Baz hum anjar adim ka an shahr mas. And soon we will go back home because why? On shahr mas. Wo firdos jannat wo hamare shahr hai. That's our home. You know? So that's some thoughts, and you know, Ustad wants to definitely add some more, but keep that idea of rahi kurkhun. Islam is not easy, right? Bada al-Islamu ghariba wa sayaudu ghariba fatuba lil ghuraba. Islam began in exile. Live in exile as a Muslim. Did not every prophet live in exile? Wasn't Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam exiled from Iraq? Wasn't Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam exiled from Egypt? Wasn't the Holy Prophet exiled from Mecca? Live in exile, that's okay. Live in ghurba. Right? Live in al-waragi. Right? This is hadith rahi kurkhun because it's the light of Allah, and it doesn't come arzani, it doesn't come cheap.
I think on that idea of living in such a way, there's a story that one time, I forget what city this was in, a traveler came and he went to visit one of the awliya, or he came upon an awliya, he didn't know it was a wali, and he came and he visited him and he sees the place that he lives in, and all he owned was like a blanket or something along those lines. He just had like a blanket and very minimal living spaces. He said, you know, where's all of your stuff? Why don't you have anything here with you? This is, you know, where's all your stuff? And he asked this visitor, this traveler, he said, where's your stuff? He said, I'm a visitor here. I'm only visiting. He said, me too. That's it.
Go on. So if you keep it away from your mouth.
Yes, gotcha. Okay. Perfect. Hopefully this is better. Yes, please let us know if the sound is better online. محرم این هوش جز بیهوش نیست. مر زبان را مشتری جز گوش نیست. He says that no one is privy to this secret, to this consciousness, really, hosh, right? Hosh is consciousness. He says no one is privy to this consciousness except for the behosh, the one who has lost his senses. Okay, so we talked earlier about the mai, right? The wine and the joshish ishq. Once you have drunk the wine that has been brewed with that joshish, that boiling of love, you will lose your consciousness, and it is only then that you will become aware of this consciousness, the consciousness that Maulana is talking about. He says, Mar zaban ra mushtari juz gosh nest. He's asking a rhetorical question. He's saying, is the gosh not the only customer for the zaban, right? So the only thing that can hear the zaban is the gosh. And if there's no gosh, the zaban can talk all at once, but no one's going to hear anything. It's no use, right? And similarly, until you do not become behosh, until you do not lose your consciousness and drown in this love of Allah and love of the divine reality, then you're not going to be able to understand what this zaban is saying. Your gosh is not going to be there.
So then he says, and this is really important because this was so crucial to Allama Iqbal's thought.
He says, در غم ما روزها بیگاه شد. روزها با سوزها همراه شد. Again, listen to the music of it. در غم ما روزها بیگاه شد. روزها با سوزها همراه شد. In our grief, our days became without time. Gah can also mean evening, so it also mean our afternoons became without evenings, but probably easier translation. Our days became without time, and our days, with our griefs, with our blazing griefs, started traveling together, or sort of united with each other, combined with each other. Hamrah came, we have Hamrahi. So this idea of that once, when we had sort of embraced our grief, when we start to live in our grief, we escaped time. And I say this because this idea of time is so interesting in Islam. There's a hadith in Abu Dawud where the Holy Prophet ﷺ said, لا تصب الدهر فإن الله يقول إني أنا الدهر. Don't curse time because Allah Himself is time. Right? Actually, when I love that hadith because in my, our Alam course is 6 years in South Africa, and that was the last hadith that we did. So I can never forget it. After 6 years of, Madrasa training, it's the final day, and that was the last hadith that we did. So it means a lot to me, But again, Iqbal gives us two types of time, taken from Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, who is from, I believe, modern day Nishapur, there in Iraq and Afghanistan, one of the most brilliant Muslims of Islam, Fakhruddin al-Razi. He says that the idea of time in Islam is that there are two forms of time. One is the time that we notice. You can sort of call it serial time. It's sort of like atomized time. These are just like lamha, lamha, dam, dam, lahda, lahda, etc. But there is a time of which that exceeds consciousness, and that's the time of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Where there's no time, and now you're just with Allah, and you have escaped time. You have escaped time, right? That we literally lost time, right? And now, Iqbal, and I think Iqbal does the best tashri' of this verse, where he says that when you truly get that light of Allah, the light that the Sufis have, then you can bring the light of that world into this world. Then you can influence everyone around you, because everyone is in grief, but it's the worst kind of grief. It's a sickness of the modern era that is so shattering and so violent that we have not been able to really reckon with it. But if we can bring the grief from that world of uniting with Allah back into this world, as the Sunnah teaches us, then truly, rozha basuzha hamrah shud, our days will become with flames, with life, with zindagi, rooze zindagani. Right? What's the line of Iqbal? खुदी को कर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से खुद पूछे बता तेरी रजा क्या है. This is the maqsad. Bata teri raza ka. You tell me, what do you want? You leave time so that Allah asks you, what is your taqdeer? Tu Musalman hai, tu taqdeer hai. Right? You yourself are taqdeer. Right? You are destiny. Come and shape the world, right, in the image of the Quranic and prophetic ethics.
روزها گر رفت گورا و باک نیست تو بمان ای آن که چون تو پاک نیست هر کی جز ماهی ز آبش سیر شد هر کی بی روزیست روزش دیر شد. Just these couple of lines, and then we'll leave the last one separate because it's on its own. But again, on this idea of time, right? The Sufi, the lover of God, is Ibn al-Waqt. He is the son of time. He is focused on the immediate moment, right? He's not focused on what's coming after or what's coming next. And like Maulana just elucidated here, this idea of when you become behosh as well, right? You lose this sense of time. I mean, I don't know if anyone here has been behosh, not my business, but you lose this sense of time, or so I've been told. You're not aware of time passing, right? And so it's this idea of time ceasing to exist, and what you're focused on is that immediate moment. He says, everyone's thirst became quenched except for the fish. The Sufi here is the fish, right? You give me this bottle of water, I'll drink it, I'll finish, eventually I'm quenched. I'll take Maulana Salih's off. Eventually I've had enough water, right? But the fish, he always needs water. And it doesn't think about, oh, when am I going to get water next, or oh, that last time I had water. No, it always is in a state of needing that water. If it does not have that water, it will seek to get that water. It needs that water. And that is how that awareness of that divine, that awareness of that behushi, that hushyari in behushi, is this being in the moment, being present, and being cognizant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all times, and not just being cognizant in trying to, but in needing Him so much, right? The fish needs the water. The fish doesn't choose to be submerged in the water, it needs it. He says, هر که بیروزیست روزش دیر شد. Again, whoever does not have his ruzi, his risk, whoever does not have that, his day will be long, right? So that there's this idea of time. He says in the final line here, در نیابد حال پخته هیچ خام. در نیابد حال پخته هیچ خام. پس سخن کوتاه باید و سلام. Our sukhan has not been kotah tonight, our speech has not been very short, but he says that no kham or unripe or uncooked will ever understand or find the hal, the state of the cooked. So we must keep our speech short. Wassalam, right? So there's a little bit to unpack here. The pukhta is the one who has not become aware of the divine reality. You could say that they are not behosh. They have not. Sorry, the kham. Did I say the pukhta? The kham is the unripe, right? And nothing that is unripe or uncooked can ever understand the state of being cooked. The cooked understands the state of the uncooked because at some point the cooked was uncooked, right? But it's never the other way around. And so when we think of purification, just really quickly, we mentioned the fire here, right? Fire cooks, it ripens, or it takes something and it makes it cooked. And what does it do? We said it purifies, right? So if you haven't been through that process where you've been on fire, where you have undergone that understanding of that ishq majnoon, that crazed love, right? Then you will never understand that state. You cannot. And so he says, what do we say to those people? In that case, he says, we keep the speech short and we say salam. There's a Quranic injunction here, right? There you go. The Ibad Rahman, the worshippers, and please forgive me if I misquote with scripture, but the believers or the slaves of Allah, when they encounter the disbelievers or the jahilun, those who are unaware or those who don't know, right? Again, those who are jahil, they don't know. Qalu salam. That's it. Exactly. Yes. I think with that, inshallah, we can open up to questions and sorry?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So
Give me like a minute. Yeah. I need to watch this.
Yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll have something on the rabab here shortly. Allah will return, and then we can also open up to questions afterwards. Maybe I'll just give a brief explanation here of the rabab. So the rabab, this one is from Kabul, it's from Afghanistan. The construction of the rabab is such that it's made from mulberry wood. Let me stand and display this. So the rabab is made from mulberry wood. It's got a skin on the part of it here. Now there's something to be said. This is in musical instruments. We have to also understand that beyond just this thing of musical instruments. Maulana himself was fond of the nai, as we've heard today. He's also made reference to the rabab many times in his poetry, right? And there's something to be said about the hollowness of the rabab. You hear that it's hollow. If the rabab was not hollow, if you do not empty yourself of your ego and your nafs, no sound will be produced. This has to be hollowed out in order for it to produce sound, in order for it to share something. Just something I wanted to share there. But getting back to the actual construction of it, mother of pearl inlay along the handle here. We've got a vestigial part. So this is back in the days when the Afghans would go to war, they would put this over their shoulder so that they could carry it, and then they'd perform before they went to war. Many ancient societies had dances and songs and things they do to hype themselves up before they went to war. Now you can see it's quite small. You don't put it on a shoulder. It's a vestigial sort of part of the instrument. But just a fun fact there, it's made of 3 main strings and then 2 drone strings. And then we've got a number of sympathetic strings which are for amplification purposes. So when you tune one of these strings to the note that you're going to play here, it will reverberate and cause amplification of the sound. Of course, this is an instrument that's very old, very ancient. It's from before we had microphones and you could just, oh, there we go, problem solved, right? So you have to be able to amplify somehow, and it also beautifies the sound beyond just the simple amplification of it. Like I mentioned, the rabab is mentioned in the poetry of Maulana and in the poetry of many others as well. What we'll be doing tonight is Maulana Saleh is going to recite some ghazals of Maulana, and I will just accompany him as background music. I hope that, inshallah, someday with Brother Sinan, we can maybe do something together. I really enjoyed hearing him recite for us today. And also on Thursday night, I had the opportunity to hear him live. It was very, very beautiful and moving. So inshallah, perhaps without further ado, I think we can begin, and then we'll do some question and answer, and we'll be here inshallah to converse with everyone.
So, because I'm an Indian Muslim, and I think the greatest, I believe the three most brilliant Muslims of Muslim India are Shawliullah Ahmad Zakir and Muhammad Iqbal al-Lahori. And then I came to Farsi because of Allama Iqbal. We're going to start off with Iqbal, and we'll end with Iqbal too. His Farsi stuff, because people have lost connections to Iqbal's Farsi, and he wrote and wept so much for the Ummah in Farsi, and I want, as a Hyderabadi Muslim, I want more and more people to engage with him.
I just need one moment here. I just want to make sure.
It's going to be mostly Farsi. We'll translate a line here and there, but I don't think English goes well with what we're talking. Also, the first Mughal king, Hazrat Muhammad Zahiruddin Babur, founder of the Mughal Empire in India, this is his favorite instrument. And after he conquered Delhi in Agra, he sat in Agra in the Nur al-Sham, and he played the Quran and recited the ghazals. And so the beginning of Islam in India is sort of with the Quran. And so may we honor that in some way.
How would you define a puzzle?
Yeah. For those people who don't know, the ghazal is a really interesting poem. It's a collection of couplets, maybe 8 to 12. Each couplet you can think of as an independent universe. They don't connect as a whole theme. They're not a singular theme. But the best way to think about it is like a tapestry. Every single thing doesn't connect to each other, but as a whole, it all connects. And at the line of the ghazal, taken from the great Arab poets, they put in there takhallus. Takhallus, how would you translate takhallus? Pen name? Pen name? Yeah, they would put their takhallus. You would hear the words, you'll hear the name Iqbal here, and you'll hear Shams al-Tabriz, because Rumi put his takhallus. Shams al-Tabriz. بفرمایید بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم به قول حضرت قلندر لاهوری درویش لاهوری امام عاشقان درمند از هندوستان محمد اقبال از سیالکوت فرمودند که صد ناله شبگیری صد صبح بلاخیزی صد ناله شبگیری صد صبح بلاخیزی صد آه شرر ریزی یک شعر دلاویزی صد ناله شبگیری صد صبح بلاخیزی صد آه شرر ریزی یک شعر دلاویزی در عشق و حسناکی دانی که تفاوت چیست در عشق و حسناکی دانی که تفاوت چیست آن تیشعی فرهادی این هیلع پرویزی هوشم برد ای مطرب مستم کند ای ساقی هوشم برد ای مطرب مستم کند ای ساقی گلبانگ دلاویزی از مرغ سحرخیزی از خاک سمرقندی ترسم که دیگر خیزد Allama Iqbal says that I fear from the dust of Samarkand. I fear that something else will arise. Asho be halakudi, hangama and Changezi, another calamity of Genghis Khan, and Asho be halakudi, tremor in the streets. Mutrebe Ghazali, O singer of ghazals, Mutrebe Ghazali, Baiti as Murshid Rum Omar. O singer of ghazals, come and bring a line from Maulana. O singer of ghazals, come and bring a line from Maulana Rumi, from Maulana Rumi. Tawhut zanat janam dar atash tabrizi, so that my soul can be submerged in the flames of Shams Tabriz. Next we will go to now a ghazal of Hazrat Maulana.
مرا عهدی است با شادی که شادی آن من باشد. مرا عهدی است با شادی که شادی آن من باشد. مرا قولی است با جانان که جانان جان من باشد. به خط خویشتن فرمان به دستم داد آن سلطان که تا تخت است و تا وقت است او سلطان من باشد. که تا تخت است و تا وقت است او سلطان من باشد. اگر هوشیار اگر مستم نگیرد غیر او دستم، دیگر من دست خود خستم همو درمان من باشد. چه زهره دارد اندیشه که گرد شهر من گردد. چه زهره دارد اندیشه که گرد شهر من گردد. که قصد ملک من دارد چو او خواهان من باشد. نبیند روی من زردی به اقبال لب لالش، بمیرد پیش من رستم چو او دستان من باشد. بیدرم زهر زهرا خراشم ماه را چهرا. بیدرم زهر زهرا خراشم ماه را چهرا. برم از آسمان مهرا چو او کیوان من باشد. چراغ چرخ گردونم چو اجرای خورشیدم. امیر گوی چوگانم چو دل میدان من باشد. منم مصر او شکرخانه چو یوسف در برم گیرم. منم مصر او شکرخانه چو یوسف در برم گیرم. چو جویان ملک کنعان را چو او کنعان من باشد. Now he says the names of Allah. زهی حاضر، زهی ناظر، زهی حافظ، زهی ناصر، زهی الزام هر منکر چو او برهان من باشد. He says that about Allah, what a wonderful one who is present. How wonderful how Allah looks at us. How wonderful how Allah protects us. How wonderful how Allah helps us. Zahi ilzam har munkir. Just these names of Allah is a proof against all those who deny Burhan man bashad, that is my Burhan. Yaki janis dar alam ke nangash ayad has surat papushat suratay insan bali insan man bashad. There is one world in this world where the form comes naked, where the form comes without any color. It wears the form of one insan, but that is my insan. Talking about Shams al-Tabriz. Sare ma hast o man majnoon, bajambani zanjiram. I have a head and I am majnoon, but don't move my chains, don't rattle my chains. Mara har dam sar mahshud chuma barkhani man bashad. سخن بخش زبان من چون باشد شمس تبریزی. سخن بخش زبان من چون باشد شمس تبریزی. Shams Tabriz gave me a tongue, he gave me a zuban. Tu khamosh ta zuban ha khud chu dil jamban man bashad. You stay quiet, for language itself, like a heart, comes and moves. اگر چرخ وجود من از این گردش فرو ماند، بگرداند مرا آن کس را که گردون را بگرداند. اگر این لشکر ما را از چشم بد شکست افتد، اگر این لشکر ما را از چشم بد شکست افتد، به امر شاه لشکرها از آن بالا فرو آید. به امر شاه لشکرها از آن بالا فرو آید. اگر باد زمستانی کند باغ مرا ویران. If the winds of winter leave my garden desolate, if the winds of winter leave my garden desolate, بهار شهریار من زدی انصاف بستاند. شمار برگ اگر باشد یکی فرعون جباری شمار برگ اگر باشد یکی فرعون جباری کف موسی یکایک را به جای خیش بنشاند. If there is one leaf from Fir'aun the tyrant, then the palm of Musa alayhi salam one by one will make it go away. مترسان دل ز سختی های این منزل مترسان دل ز سختی های این منزل که آب چشم حیوان بتا هرگز نمی راند. Don't fear, O heart, don't fear, O heart, because the difficulties of this house to the water of life will never die. رأيناكم وأخرجنا خفاياكم فإن لم تنتهوا عنها فإيانا وإياكم وإن طفتم حوالينا وأنتم نور عينانا فلا تستيأسوا منا فإن العيش أحياكم. We have seen you, we have removed your secrets, and if you don't stop, then off between you and us. And if you do tawaf around us and you are the light of our eyes, never be despondent from Allah, for life will give you life. رأيناكم وأخرجنا خفاياكم فإن لم تنتهوا عنها فإيانا وإياكم وإن طفتم حوالينا وأنتم نور عينانا فلا تستيأسوا منا فإن العيش أحياكم. شکست بست تازه های برای عشق بازی ها بگویم هرچه من گویم شهیدارم که بستاند. چه من خود را نمی یابم سخن را از کجا یابم. Who am I? I can't find myself. We have lost ourselves. Who am I? I can't find myself. From where does this sukhan come? From where does this poetry come? چو من خود را نمی یابم سخن را از کجا یابم. هما شمعی که داد این را همون شمعم بگیراند. The final ghazal of Maulana that we will say is where he shouts in ecstasy of the ummah, and he starts off every line with, "Oh Muslims, oh Muslims." مسلمانا مرا جانی از سودایی چون توفا بر سرم بارد از این سودا ز بالایی. مسلمانا مرا جانی سودایی که چون توفا بر سرم بارد از این سودا ز بالایی. مسلمانا به هر روز یکی شوری به کوی لولیم افتد از آن لولی سرنایی. مسلمانا ز جان پرسید که ای سابق. مسلمانا ز جان پرسید که ای سابق برای تور اندیشه حریفان را چه می پایی. مسلمانا بشویید از دل من دست که از این اندیشه دادم دل به دست موج دریایی. Oh Muslims, ask from the soul. Oh Muslims, ask from the soul. Oh Muslims, wash your hands from this heart, leave your heart. Because from this andesha, I have given the heart the crest of the wave. مسلمانا خبر آن کار فرما را. مسلمانا خبر آن کار فرما را که سخت از کار رفتم من مرا کاری بفرمایی. Oh Muslims, the command of Allah, I failed at it, but oh Allah, command me one more time. Oh Muslims, the news of Allah, the command of Allah, oh Allah, I failed, but oh Allah, command me one more time. مسلمانا امانت دست من گیرید بی که مستم ره نمیدانم بدان معشوق زیبایی. O Muslims, take my hand. O Muslims, take my hand, for I am drunk. I don't know the road towards the gorgeous beloved. مسلمانا به کوی او سپاریدم، بر آن خاکم بخسبانید ز آن خاک از بینایی. مسلمانا زبان پارسی گویم که نبود شرط در جمعی شکر خوردن به تنهایی. O Muslims, I speak Farsi, and in a gathering, it's not necessary that you eat sugar alone. You share the sugar with everyone else. That love of Allah, share with everyone else. بیا ای شمس تبریزی که بر دست این سخن بیزی. Come, O Shams Tabriz, because on this hand, or on these hands, is this purifying poetry. Come, O Shams Tabriz, for on these hands are purifying poetry. We don't need anyone other than you, Shams Tabriz. Only you are necessary. We will end with the ghazal of Allama Iqbal. May Allah give him joy in the afterlife, and may we all testify on behalf of Iqbal for writing for the Ummah. Na tu andar haram gunji na dar budkhana mein aayi, na tu andar haram gunji na dar budkhana mein aayi, walakin suye mushtaqan chay mushtaqan mein aayi. Neither do you have the keys to the Kaaba, neither do you go into the idol house, but towards the lovers, how mushtaqan, how much yearning do you come? قدم بیباک تر نه در حریم جان مشتاقان، قدم بیباک تر نه در حریم جان مشتاقان. تو صاحب خانه ای آخر چرا دزدان می آیی. O Muslims, do you own this house? Why do you walk in like a thief? O Muslims, تو صاحب خانه ای آخر چرا دزدان می آیی. O Muslims, you own your own house. Why do you walk in like a thief? بغارت می بری سرمایه تسبیح خوانان را، بغارت می بری سرمایه تسبیح خوانان را، به شبخون دل زناریان ترکان می آیی. گهی صد لشکر انگیزی که خون دوستان ریزی، گهی در انجمن با شیشه و پیمان می آیی. He says, O Muslims of today, sometimes with 100 armies, you go and you spill the blood of other Muslims. گهی صد لشکر انگیزی که خون دوستان ریزی، گهی در انجمن با شیشه و پیمان می آیی. And then sometimes you come to us in a gathering with a bottle of wine coming to celebrate. گهی صد لشکر انگیزی که خون دوستان ریزی, you spill the blood of your own friends. گهی در انجمن با شیشه و پیمان می آیی. And after you spill the blood of your friends, you come to us with a bottle of wine in your hands. Listen to this. تو بر نخل کلیمی بی محابا شعله می ریزی. تو بر نخل کلیمی بی محابا شعله می ریزی، تو بر شمع یتیمی صورت پروانه می آیی. He says that you sat on the shrub of Musa alayhi salam, and without care, you burned it. You set it on fire. You had the tree of Musa. You had the nakhl of Musa alayhi salam. Bay mahaba, without any care, without any love, you set it on fire. Tu bar sham'i yatimi surat parvana mayi. And now, like a mom, you come to an orphan candle in the West and you hover around it, and you set your own candle on fire. You set your own tree on fire, the tree of Musa alayhi salam, you set that on fire, and now you come to an orphan candle and you hover around it. Tu bar nakhli kalimi bay mahaba shu'la mayrizi, تو بر شمع یتیمی an orphan candle صورت پروانه میایی. بیا اقبال جامی از خمستانی خودی در کش. بیا اقبال جامی از خمستانی خودی در کش. تو از میخانه مغرب ز خود بیگانه میایی. Come اقبال, come and take a wine of glass from your own khudi, from your own self. Come and see what you can offer as a Muslim. بیا اقبال جامی از خمستانی خودی در کش. Come O Iqbal, come take a wine from your own self. See what your ancestors have done. تو از میخانه مغرب ز خود بیگانه میایی. But no, you left the wine house of the West as a stranger unto your own self.
SubhanAllah. That was very nice. We're going to end the live stream here. Thanks you all for joining us. We'll continue on with our live group here. Thank you all.